Oh, there it goes. Or did you?
Yeah, we're live. So, hello, everybody. Welcome to the world of street fight politics. It's another week of just absolute madness. Uh, we don't even bother preparing for these shows until literally about 24 hours beforehand because there is just so much craziness that goes on with these things that it's futile to try to do so. But I've got something I need to get off my chest here. It's like, Gordon Lightfoot. I'm sure you know the guy, and it's like everybody knows Edmund Fitzgerald. But there's a song that I have been calling "Every Highway" for my entire life. And I just found out today, and you got to remember, I live in Phoenix next to a city called Carefree, which you get to by Carefree Highway. And now I learned the song is Carefree Highway, which is like, wow. And in my mind, I'm not ever going to be able to change. It's still going to be Every Highway for the rest of my life. I'll know it's Carefree Highway, but you know what? It's too late. It's just been imprinted into my brain. So anyway, we've got a lot to talk about today. It's, we've got empty shelves staring us in the face, empty uteruses staring us in the face. So, Christine, what do you got to say about that?
Yeah, so there's been a lot of chatter over the last few weeks about a baby bonus where the Trump regime is offering to pay couples $5,000. I'm not sure if this would be, as part of their Doge dividend or if it would be in the form of some type of like tax rebate or something like that. But, it keeps bringing up the discussion of birth rates. Why are they so low? It seems like it's not only the United States, it's different parts of the world. So, I think that there's a lot of reasons why that is, and that $5,000 ain't going to cut it. So that's where I'm at on that.
Well, I mean, it shows just how out of touch these people are. I mean, it's like if you look right now, to get pregnant, have prenatal care, get to the hospital and have a baby, depending on what part of the country you're in, is anywhere from $12,000 to $20,000. That's just to get out of, get the baby home.
Yeah.
When you look at how much does it cost to raise a child after that, I mean, I count, back when I had my kids, and this is a long time ago. I was looking at 250,000 to 300,000 just to get them to 18. It's, I'm sure it's a lot more than that, and that's not, that's not a lot of bells and whistles in that figure either. So, let me talk to you, my dear Republican colleagues. You want to really alter the market? Then how about we do free childcare? We make sure each of those children has food every day until they're not 18. Let's make it 21. That they have free schooling, and it is good schooling. Basically, we're going to take care of all the needs, make sure that they have shelters, a roof over their head every night. And you know what? I bet you then women would consider that, I can go through, all the stuff that women have to do to have a child. What do you think about that, Christine?
I mean, I feel like it's a good start. I think that the cost is definitely daunting for people. And because we live in late stage unregulated capitalism, everybody thinks of everything in, a cost benefit analysis of dollars and cents. And also, I think there's a lot more awareness about wanting to be a good parent. So a lot of people feel like I'm never going to be able to like make a living and also be a good parent. So I think things that you said, like, free schooling, help making sure that kids get meals. Preschool is like a huge thing, like free universal preschool. Interestingly enough for me, I had my daughter when I was pretty young. I was 20. And I actually had her like the day that Barack Obama was elected president, which was very interesting because one good thing that Obama did is he did bring back a lot of like subsidies and aid for parents to be able to go to school, like specifically young parents. So because of that, even though things were hard, I still had like a lot of opportunities that I feel like with what's going on with the Department of Education, that people are going to, they're not going to be able to get an education. And then when they have children, it's going to be even more difficult, you know, to make that work financially. So it's kind of just, you know, this lack of social safety nets, lack of support, and this sort of like attitude that everybody's just got to take care of themselves. There's no more village. You know, on a deeper level, I think that we need to repair that if we want people to, like you said, want to go through all of the danger and expense and, you know, frankly, sacrifice of having kids.
Well, I mean, it even goes in further than that. I mean, it's like it wasn't Hegseth, but you know, one of his little henchmen that was under that, you know, sent out a tweet that, or was speaking, I guess it was this weekend, and said, if you're an adult male veteran, you know, you need to stop eating Cheetos because we're not going to give you food, you know, and you need to get up basically off your ass and go to work. And I don't know if you've ever been around a VA. You know, there's a lot of these guys that, you know, sort of like have their legs missing, can't really do a lot. You know,
Yeah. Yeah.
and you know that, and, you know, because they have never been confronted with life issues like that, you know, they can say stuff that is that malignant and cruel, and think it's perfectly fine.
And that's part of the fascist rhetoric, though, is that's part of the useless feeders, you know, people that sit around and take, you know, the parasite class. And that basically goes for anybody who isn't serving the money machine. You know, as soon as you are not useful as human capital, all of a sudden, you know, there's lots of degrading going on. And we know that like a feature of fascism is this obsession with fitness, you know, having a certain physique.
Oh
You
yeah,
know,
Hexeth did say he's not going to have any fat officers anymore. So, like,
he did say that. Yeah, he did say that. Ugh.
You know, I haven't seen, you know, too many sumo wrestlers as Navy admirals. So,
But you know, it amazes me because in one breath, you know, they are degrading people for making certain choices about what they eat, but they also make no effort to make sure that the food environment is actually conducive to a healthy population because they're in the pocket of big business where, you know, it's very easy for them to serve people cheap slop in food deserts and then blame them for what's going on. And frankly, the type of education that they give people on nutrition is abysmal. You know, the food pyramid was like literally made by big business. And then you wonder why people like don't trust science. And trust me, I'm a science truster. So I'm not advocating for not doing that. But, you know, again, like, for example, like maybe this is silly of me, but like as a young parent, I used to be very susceptible to like certain commercials on TV telling me that, you know, like, oh, you know, this is wholesome because, you know, it's made of whole grains or it's organic or it's this or it's that. But then you find out that, oh, you know, actually, like a lot of these foods really aren't so great. And, you know, it's kind of paralyzing. You're not sure what the right decision is to make. And then people blame you when something goes wrong.
so you don't like polysorbate red dye number 5 and all these other industrial chemicals in processed foods?
You know, I'm not, so I'm the type of person where I don't think, well, just because it has a complicated name doesn't mean it's necessarily dangerous or bad. The problem is that they are letting in some things with complicated names that are dangerous and bad. And, nobody's really getting to the bottom of it, because why would we spend money to fix a problem that's going to cost people money?
Well, actually, as sort of like a segue, one of the things that Project 2025 is doing is basically neutering the FDA, food and drug. So, they're turning it over to let all these food processors, they'll just regulate themselves and, make sure that they're the quality control. And the reason we put that in is when you go back, well, literally it's like 120, 130 years ago. Upton Sinclair wrote, a couple of novels about that, about, just how horrific, our food was back at that time. And it's like, did you know they used, I think it was, they put lead in ketchup because it made it redder. That was a long time ago. And it may not be lead, but it's some really toxic chemical. And it's just like, I think it may have been tar, but whatever it is, you didn't want to eat.
Yeah. I mean, the classic example of sawdust in the bread, like just making bread with sawdust to make it look white, but also be cheap.
Well, it's also fiber. So it's like, there is some benefits.
You can't have too much of it though. Otherwise, I mean, that's the thing, is they're never going to regulate themselves. And we could still have so much prosperity with just some common sense regulation. We have plenty of money for the FDA. It's ridiculous.
There's a line of political thinking that's called the great abundance. And, when you look at it, there shouldn't be anybody in this country that should go to bed hungry. We've got more than we know what to do with. We have to ship it to China and all these other countries. And now we're not shipping it to China because, thank you, Donald, because tariffs farmers are being punished for that. But that's the point. There should be no reason that you shouldn't have a baseline of food. No reason you shouldn't have a baseline of healthcare. No reason that you shouldn't be able to drink clean water, breathe clean air. And all those have literally been taken off the table. All of them.
It's wild. It's absolutely wild that all of those things are commodified in a very rich country. And
it's like there was a story that Elon Musk has got some big data center that he put in West Phoenix, in the poorest neighborhood he could find. And he's powering them with some 30 gas generators that apparently are putting out just some awful toxic chemicals, formaldehyde, apparently a lot of it too. And they were saying, he had promised that these were only going to be, sort of like for emergency use, but he basically disconnected from the grid, and that's the only thing they're using.
It's outrageous. And y'all don't have enough water over there. Water is a huge problem. And then they're using it for these big data centers because they want infinite growth. And we don't need infinite growth. We can, we have a lot already.
Well, coming back to what we were started out with is not only are we not going to have infinite growth, we're having ungrowth. And the fact that in the Western world, China, Japan, Korea, Australia, New Zealand, and I'm not sure through the Middle East, but I know Israel for sure, that women are not having babies that keep up with replacement. The thing that I've read for, ever is that every woman has to have 2.1 babies just to replace the population and keep it stable. Yeah. And, take in the women that for whatever reason never have babies. It really means that the women that are having babies need to really have closer to 3. And if you look around, there's not a lot of families that are having 3 and 4 and 5 kids these days. Now you go back in the 60s. Yeah. My family, we had 3 kids, I have 2 kids, and, my daughter has 2 kids. So, 4 grandparents are, we're choking down. We're going from 4 to 2 grandkids, which means that, they'll have their pick of which houses after we die to take over. So,
Well,
but
that's if anybody has one left. I mean,
they
you
will.
might, but a lot of people are concerned about that too. That, you know, the generational wealth that should have filtered down from the baby boomers and elder Gen X
Well,
is not going to wind up going to their kids because of healthcare and the way our healthcare system is set up.
Well, I mean, that again shows a lot of the inequity is that most of the boomer wealth is being held by about 25% of the boomers, or probably really less than that, probably closer to 10%. So, you know, unless you, you know, won the birth lottery and picked the right parents, most millennials, Gen Zers, people coming after us, they're not going to see any inheritance.
No.
If anything, their parents are going to die leaving behind bills. And, and when you look around at the world, like Japan, Italy, it's like I get these ads every day in my social media, pointing out that you can go to these countries that are already suffering severe population declines, Spain, Portugal, Italy, Japan. They will pay you to go take over a house if you'll renovate it and live in it.
Yep.
And there are some places in Italy I've read, as much as $25,000 to move there.
Yep.
Which is, but it's like they've got all these empty houses just sitting there, and if you don't do something with them, they get into disrepair, rot, and fall apart very quickly. So they don't want to lose that housing stock.
They do. And, in Southern Europe, it seems like a lot of the problem with the birth rate decline is simply kind of a brain drain and lack of opportunities outside of tourism. There's definitely a lot of historic universities and things like that you can get involved with, but it's not, they're not hubs of technology. And, so a lot of people leave, and, there's just not as many opportunities for people.
Well,
Oh, go on. No, you're good.
I was just going to say, I think the other thing is, women, even in places like Italy and, pretty macho places like that, they got agency and they said, I'm not going to be a baby machine. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
It's
so right.
Well,
I think,
go ahead.
I was going to say that I was reflecting on this problem and trying to think, it seems like in a lot of places, the problem is for different reasons. In some places it's, because of brain drain, people, don't want to stay there. In other places, it's because the work culture is crazy. Like, for example, in China, Japan, Korea, the United States at this point, work culture is, it's crushing for people. But I was thinking about like Scandinavian countries or like in Northern Europe, where they seem to be comfortable with their societies not continuously growing. And kind of like, instead of having like a large population and it getting bigger and bigger, how can we sort of make things as good as possible for the people that we already have here?
How about if you look at it, you're in equilibrium with your environment?
Yeah, exactly. And I kind of wonder is like, who does this constant growth actually benefit? Like, sure, we need to be replacing to an extent. Like, we don't want the population to go into free fall because it's just not going to be good for anybody. But, is like, why is there so much alarm around it? And maybe there's more, maybe it's something that would take care of itself if we improved conditions.
Well, again, it's like, in Japan, women just almost decided en masse, their culture is very misogynistic toward women. And, to get married is basically committing yourself as a woman to a life of servitude and, taking care of parents and things like that. And they said, I'm just not going to do that. It's, and, and in fact, in Japan, they even left the workforce because they decided, if I'm not going to go through all that, why do I need to work that hard when I can, just work hard enough to take care of myself and, and enjoy life. Pretty much that's what they've been doing for the last 30 years or so, which is why they're popular. I mean, and the thing is it's when you say that the population is going to shrink, it's not something that is, a fantasy. It's baked in the demographic numbers. It's not like you can press a button and all of a sudden, you start popping babies out. And especially you can't pop babies out 20 years ago when they would be entering the workforce now. It's like you've got what you've got.
You do. And I mean, one example is like Russia. Russia took a huge population hit, in the middle of the 20th century, and they still have not recovered. Like they, it's you look at the graphs and it's absolutely crazy. And, it's something that now that they've engaged in, multi-year wars is starting to really come to a head for them. And you kind of wonder, like, what is that spiral going to look like? And what is that going to tell us about what's going to happen to everybody else?
Well, that makes them dangerous because now, you start, losing constraints about what you're going to do because, it's like you've got nothing to lose at that point. And here's the thing is we're one of the few places in the world that if we're not replacing ourselves, with women having babies, we were doing a real good job with having people immigrating here, and doing the stuff that, most white boys, don't want to do, digging ditches and laying pipe and stuff like that. And guess what? We're kicking them out of the country. It is like, it's a lot of stuff that's bad about that. But if you need people to pick tomatoes and you're not willing to do it, it's not a real good idea to kick them out. And then they go back to Mexico where they also grow tomatoes and import us and then tell us, oh yeah, we're going to put a 150% tariff on those tomatoes. I mean, it is just fiscal insanity. And, it just drives me up a wall that you, me, and a lot of other people were just trying to lay the facts out there that no, tariffs are not going to be paid by Mexico. They're not going to be paid by China. You're going to pay them. So basically, it is a hidden tax on everybody, but especially the poorest in society. And that's why Trump loves tariffs. If he says, I want to raise taxes, people go crazy. I'm not going to, that's tax. If you say tariff, no, I love that word. It's just the loveliest word in the world. I've got the best tariffs. That's his way of raising taxes on the lower class and the middle class, of what is left of the middle class, and everybody. And it's, if anybody understood that, there's no way this guy gets elected. But, he just, nobody, especially in the corporate media, push back on that.
No. It's
like, well, don't somebody, no. It's like, well, we're going to make sure China pays this. They've been taking advantage of us for years. Yeah. Well, guess what? What they did is that the corporate lords of the 70s and 80s, and I know this for a fact because I watched GM do it back when I was a summer intern back in the late 70s, were basically either taking the machines or literally writing the manuals on taking all their stuff, going down to Mexico, Hermosillo, other places like that, there's a huge GM plant down there that used to be stuff that I used to do in Athens, Alabama, and transferred it because they knew that they could pay somebody, $2 an hour, which is even a lot, at the time for Mexico, and, get just as good, if not better quality, bring it back across the border. If you don't have tariffs, GM's profits go way up doing it.
Yeah. And what just occurred to me also is it seems like a lot of this outsourcing of cheap consumer goods that, we have gotten used to having in abundance, all in a weird way kind of go back to oil. We have United States car culture. So we want to think, how can we make as many cars as quickly and as cheaply as possible so we can have as many cars as possible in the whole industry around that. Everything we get from China, or a lot of it, plastic, and it all kind of in its own way, sort of goes back to this, fossil fuel dependence. A lot of the, fascism that we're dealing with, frankly, is sort of like the last, death rattles of this industry trying to like desperately cling on to power. We can't talk about climate change anymore in the government. And that's another reason, the Zoomers don't want to have kids, is because, they live their whole lives being told that we're going through a climate change situation. They're aware of it. They don't know why there's no adults in the room. But for some reason, we're just really like overly dependent on these industries. We don't want to put any money into transitioning. And that kind of circles back to the abundance, conversation
Well,
of,
it costs money to transition. And
it does.
the problem is that they may not be alive to capture the increased revenue, because if you look at it, we can, the jobs that you create are actually very high-tech jobs. They should pay well. They're going to keep you employed for the rest of your life. So, I mean, it's a win-win to do this, but you've got people that are entrenched in power that, don't want to give that up.
They don't.
And, they want to keep drilling. They don't want to put up solar panels.
No, they don't. And, maybe solar panels aren't entirely the answer either, but it's like, we can't even go there because there's such a stranglehold on everything. And it's interesting because where I went to school at Stony Brook, they have the School of Sustainability Studies. And some of the people there were recently part of a documentary that you can probably find on Hoopla called Follow the Money. And it's about modern monetary theory, but it was talking about how during World War II, we didn't think about what things cost in dollars and cents. We thought about, where are the resources? How can we reorganize them so that we can fight a war and we can win? And their argument is that we should be looking at climate change and things like that in the same way, that it's, where are the resources that we need to do it? And what kind of deals do we have to cut to get those resources? It's not really about the money at that point, but, this conversation about the, national debt and the deficit and all of this other stuff, it always just makes it seem like it's impossible to make any progress when, is that really the case?
I've got news for you. 100 years from now, nobody's going to care. Do we care about the Sumerians' debt from 3,500 years ago? Oh, yeah. I'm sure they had it. In fact,
No.
I think that's what.
And we wouldn't have cared about the debt if we were all speaking German right now either.
Correct.
So, it's a good thing that they did what they did in World War II to do that. And like you said, they're not going to be around. The people who like the status quo are not going to be around to see the abundance that comes out of that investment. It's all about this short-term gains, and can't live like that.
Speaking of short-term and abundance, guess what? In 2 weeks, we are not going to have, which is short-term. Not only are we not going to have abundance, you are getting ready to have empty shelves as far as the eye can see. And this is not speculation. This is just looking at the numbers of cargo ships that have been coming in from China. And it is, I'm calling it empty shelf Armageddon. It's like this past weekend, the report is that the CEOs of Walmart, Target, all the big boys, got hold of Trump and said, you've got to stop this, because literally we will have empty shelves and there's not a thing we can do about it. And now it's probably about 10 days from now, 10 days. And this has been going on because people like those CEOs, they're not going to take chances bringing a bunch of stuff in if all of a sudden they're going to be sitting on something that, they bought for $1 that now they have to pay another $1.50 in tariffs on because, they lose money, so they sit on their hands and they don't do anything. So over the last month, container ships have been coming in what they call light. And they, were supposed to be carrying 10,000 containers. They've got 6,000.
Yeah.
Which is huge. And fewer of them are coming. We also, I can't remember the term, but there are container ships that are now skipping U.S. ports because they don't have anything to drop off in U.S. ports or anything to pick up since nobody's buying anything from us. And when you look at the ships that are scheduled to come in, they're pretty much after 10 days. There's no more ships coming out of China, no more ships coming out of Japan, none out of Korea. So once they get here, that's it. And what the numbers are showing is that you're down 80% by in the next 10 days, 2 weeks. After that, it's not like there's the magic button you can push that all of a sudden starts, loading up the ships, because this whole process, if you say you want something out of China, you have to go in, do the orders, get it going. I mean, you're talking weeks just to get it in a container to ship here.
Yeah.
And in fact, right now, the stuff that you're supposed to be shipping for the Christmas season is supposed to be coming in over the next 6 to 8 weeks on cargo ships. They're not coming in. In fact, when you look at in China, they're shutting factories down.
They are.
I saw news reports on that they're shutting lots of, especially the factories that are geared toward goods coming to the U.S., closing them, shuttering them, because there's no market.
Yeah. Well, especially now that they got rid of the, I forget what they called it, but basically under $800, you didn't have to pay any tariffs bringing stuff in. And that's where your Temus and your Sheins, that was, really their loophole. And now that that's gone, people are actually making videos showing their Temu receipts online, and the price of the tariff is more than what they ordered. And a lot of small businesses, rely on selling, little trinkets and stuff from there. And, they're going to shutter first. There's pain to go all around.
Well, I'm just hoping that's the slap in the face that gets even the maggots' attention, because it's like when you see empty shelves, you're going to get blamed. Somebody's, when that happens and you can't buy stuff for your kids, and who's to blame? And that's one of those things that the Democrats better have a battle plan ready to go, because that these guys from Trump and all of his little minions are going to be out there, and it's going to be Biden's fault, and everybody, it's not going to be Trump's fault.
I know, it's Rich. I swear, it's Biden. When Carolyn Levitt was doing her 8:30 a.m. Eastern time press conference this morning, which was just absolutely dripping with desperation. She's never up that early. They like to do a nice 1 o'clock or something like that. They had Tom Homan up there, and they look like they hate each other. Like, if he would go closer to the microphone, she would go and stand like 5 feet away from him.
He's pretty easy to hate. So.
Oh, I'll
give that to her.
He's the worst, but it's just like they wanted to get on there before the markets opened, to hammer home their, lies about immigration, because they think that that's their saving grace when the economy is like literally crashing. And like you said, it's like how does the rest of the Republican Party not see the writing on the wall, and why are they not jumping ship super fast?
They see it. It's just that they're so I can't understand it. I mean, if you have any intelligence at all, it's like, this guy's not going to be around much longer. I mean, you looked at him in Rome. I mean, the guy looked like this drooling, literally drooling, slack jawed, open mouth, sitting there like that.
But you know what? With them, every accusation is a confession, right? So what were they saying about Joe Biden? Oh, Sleepy Joe, auto pen president. You know who I think is the real auto pen president? Is he really in charge of the ship at this point? Or is it? So. I think there's a power vacuum. And I heard something intriguing that maybe Susie Wiles is the real villain in this equation. Maybe she's the real chaos agent kind of pulling the strings and, sowing discord between the cabinet members and overriding Trump. I don't know.
Well, that's been Trump's modus operandi, ever since he's been a businessman. Bullshit Harvey, I like that, Laura. So it's good.
A businessman. If by businessman you mean Russian asset, then yes, he's an excellent businessman.
But this is going to be a tangent. I want to come back on, to this topic. But I've been binge watching this series called Fall of Civilizations. And I started out with Sumerians, went to the Hittites, and then on to the Babylonians. And it's like, damn, why didn't they have this back when I was in high school? I would have actually understood this stuff instead of, just trying to memorize it by rote and having no clue who these guys were. So, the sea people, and then, on to, Alexander the Great and the Egyptians, the pharaohs, Ramses I, the Romans. The key feature is every last one of those societies rose and fell, and they all fell for pretty much the same reason. And that was, catastrophic climate change.
Yeah.
And it's like, obviously, they can't put their finger on, well, they got, carbon dioxide up to, levels not seen, in 200 million years. But, it's like when you go back and look at every last one of those societies, they had catastrophic droughts that lasted decades. And that's, Hittite, Sumerians, all those older civilizations, and, they fell, and the thing is, when they fell, it's not like, 10, 100 years together, they reconstituted themselves. Those cities have been empty ever since.
Yeah.
You can go, when you go on tourist trips and you go to Syria, and when you used to be able to do that, you can go see the ancient walls of cities that have been empty for 3,500 years. So, and it's an easy thing to look at where we are as Trump is a symptom. He's not the cause of this. He's just somebody that managed to pick up a historical wave, ride it to the presidency, and the ability to stop this is looking pretty grim right now.
It does look grim, but one thing that stands out to me when I think about our civilization, if you want to call it Western civilization, and its decline, what we didn't have back then was a world that was as interconnected as our world is. And where I think we really start to get into trouble is if we get this sort of technocracy dream that the Western Hemisphere is going to be its own, isolated thing, and we're not going to deal with Asia, Europe, and Africa at all. We're going to have, everything here. And I think that's why the civilizations wind up failing, because if you have, an entire world of knowledge that you're not out destroying, you're not competing, you're cooperating, with your neighbors in other places, trade can make up for things that maybe we can't grow here anymore.
Well, that was one of the other things is when you go back and look historically, there's always some mineral or resource that's in short supply that's controlled by very few people. It's like you go back thousands of years. The only places you could get tin was in Afghanistan and Britain. And if you were in the Bronze Age, copper is actually pretty common. Tin, on the other hand, is very rare.
Yeah.
Transition to 2025, and we need rare earth metals. And guess who has almost the entire world supply of them? China. So, and if they were going to use those as a weapon, it'd be exactly what they're doing right now. They've cut off the supply to the rest of the world, which is, to me, really the most hidden catastrophic thing that is actually going on, because those rare earth metals literally are involved in almost everything we do. It's like I look around my desk, the computers, monitors, my audio equipment, my cars, everything has got some type of rare earth in it. And if anything else, is going to shut down a lot of our own U.S. industry. It's so the empty shelf Armageddon one is coming. I've started seeing a little bit of it already, where it's just, and the thing is, that's been going on for a while now, where you'll just have this random stretch of shelves that are empty. But you're going to be seeing that a lot more over the next 10 days. And it's just, if these Target and Walmart CEOs are correct, you're going to see whole aisles just, it's going to look like one of those scenes, after the hurricane hits, they just literally strip the stores of everything they can get out of it.
I think, though, we need to also take a minute to appreciate the complicity of these big corporations in doing this. Because, if we're being completely honest, they could weather a quarter or two of carrying some extra inventory, maybe, eating a little bit on tariffs to keep our society stable during a period of transition.
Oh, aren't we the lefty woke person?
I know, it's just
corporations caring about the public. I mean, come on.
You know what? I don't expect them to care necessarily, but that's why they need to get regulated. And I mean, first, like, we are in very unusual times.
Project 2025 does not like that. I'm sorry.
No, they don't like regulation at all. Rules for thee, but not for me. But, I guess it's a symptom of a sick and broken system that is short-sighted and greedy from every single angle. It keeps people in a position of scarcity for a reason. And now it's kind of all coming to a head because we have a sociopath that is not keeping things together just well enough so that, the center doesn't give out, but now the center is going to give out.
Well, I think that you're starting to see the people closest to him that aren't the true believers in Project 2025 and all this other tariffs and stuff like that. They're starting to recognize, that this guy has dementia. Which is why he's got classic signs of it, and we're getting into advanced dementia. This is the stuff where you don't recognize a whale from a giraffe from a rhinoceros. So we're getting closer to that, and we don't have a mechanism that actually works to get him out of the way, because he's put all the people in as cabinet members that would make that decision to remove him. And so, it's like, we can literally be driven into a ditch and be in a place that is going to take, a decade or more to get out of, if it doesn't cause something permanent. I mean, the whole thing is, you go back and look at all these things. I'm sure people were quite unconcerned in 475 AD that lived in Rome, not recognizing that the Visigoth would be coming in and burn the city a year from now. So.
Yeah, no, well, and also though they had been desensitized for, for decades by that point of, constant smaller raids and having absolute lunatics in charge. Like, so they were, a tired, desensitized people that were probably pretty ripe to get taken over at that point.
That's a good point. I mean, it's like, that's what we're doing to ourselves.
We know we certainly are. I say all the time, like Caligula would blush at what goes on, with some of these people. And
I think he got a bad rap.
So, Caligula?
Yeah. So.
Oh, I mean, it's I'm not really sure how exactly we come back from this. I think if they can get Pete Hegseth out of there and somebody in there that is like even just a hair more responsible than Marco Rubio, like, you know what I mean? Like, we just need somebody that's not a complete traitor in Pete Hegseth's position.
Unfortunately, that's who they've got in there. I mean, it's like, if you were going to remove Pete Hegseth, you've already done it. It's, if any other person in the military had done even one of the things that he did, they would be court-martialed.
100%.
And in fact, considering the number that he's done, he'd be court-martialed and put in Leavenworth for a pretty good lengthy prison sentence. So, Trump can't back down. He can't admit it, he's wrong. It's never done that. That's all part of the Roy Kahn ethos that, you always attack, double down. So I think the good thing is that we've, on our bulwark and the people on the line now are Democratic governors, especially
Yes.
Pritzker, even Gavin Newsom, who I've, got some issues with playing footsie with, these right-wing podcasters.
Yeah.
And the like. Definitely, you've got law firms that decided, we're going to stand up. I think they also recognize that, once we get past this, the taint of, kowtowing with Trump is going to be the same as, if you were kowtowing with Hitler, back, although, didn't seem to hurt BMW.
Well, there's always those who are able to have that plausible deniability. But yes, I think people are starting to wake up to the fact that there is going to be a morning after. Like, it's not, this is not just our, helpless descent into autocracy. There still are a number of institutions that are standing up and, recognizing this for what it is. And I just, I think that the important thing is to just keep the pressure on and keep the pressure on in every respect to where anybody who cooperates is a pariah. And that's, there can be no
one of the organizations, which is not a top-down organization, but is literally coming from the top, is the 50-51 movement. And I've just started looking at that here recently. And it's, there's nobody in control. It's a lot of local organizations, and they're getting out, all over the country, and they're peacefully protesting, as much as anything, education, and I'm hoping that they'll take the time when the empty shelves hit, that you stand outside of your Walmarts and Targets and other things and just say, yeah, he did this. Those empty shelves, you might as not even bother going in because you're not going to find anything.
Yeah, and they will be. 50-51 is not the same as indivisible, but they're aligned and they're working together. And it's also a very similar model where they're sort of the largest node in a distributed network. And now with Trump coming after Act Blue and a lot of the fundraising that some of these groups rely on a national level, the leaders of Indivisible said, he might come after us, and that's going to suck. And, we'll have to sort of, bow out to deal with that. But it's sort of like a hydra where what happened?
Oh, with Act Blue? Are you kidding? I donated several times in the last 24 hours. It's like Donald Trump is helping Act Blue amazingly.
The best ad
I've never
ever.
seen anything like this. No one's ever seen anything like this. I mean, it's like I'm going to do, just a total wild tangent. It's like Donald Trump changed the Canadian election.
Yeah.
Changed it. It was supposed to be a blowout walk in the park for the Conservative Party. They were going to elect their version of Donald Trump. They were up by 25 points just a mere 6-8 weeks ago, and Trump came in and endorsed that guy. This guy was well known for the colorful version of Donald Trump, and oh my God, it's the Labor Party is not only going to retain the leadership, they're going to pick up seats.
Yeah, we were like a canary for them. And, Europe didn't need a canary. Europe saw this for what it was right away. And they have their own issues, in certain countries or whatever. But I think, to them, because they had that upfront experience of World War II, where it was, really on the home front for them, you see this and, you see this fascism for what it is. And I think for a lot of Americans, we think that we're very special and that, what happened in Germany or Italy or Spain could never happen here. And it's here. And Canada, they were like, oh, it's here. How about we don't? And, they're better for it. And it's good, though, because we need a strong ally on the right side of history, holding the line up there so that we don't lose the entire continent here.
Well, and again, I'm actually not optimistic, but, I'm beginning to see some glimmers of hope. I mean, Trump's now down below 40% on his approval ratings, and that man lives and breathes his personal approval polls. And, you get this down in the low 30s, get that down. And I think you're going to have a real shot at that coming up, mid-May, that, it's just going to be, catastrophic for, his approval ratings. Yeah. And it's, it's going to be pitchfork time.
It is going to be pitchfork time. And that's what the people from Indivisible were saying. They were saying that, even if certain people get cut down because this movement is distributed, another leader is going to pop right up. And it's not about one person, it's about everybody. And that we all have to be like witnesses here and keeping track, because there is going to be that moment of reckoning. And everybody who did impeachable offenses, we're talking Mike Johnson, we're talking J.D. Vance, we're talking Pete Hegseth, we're talking Robert F. Kennedy. All of these people will need to be held to account. None of them have immunity. And I think that reminding people, like you said, reminding people when shit starts hitting the fan in a couple of weeks, who's responsible, and getting them very engaged is going to show these Republicans in Congress that they need to start doing their job, because, in the process of losing our democracy, they're going to lose their jobs too. So it's, I don't know what it's going to take for them to do something, but I'm hoping you're right. And by mid-May, he'll be in the low 30s and hung out to dry.
Well, that's certainly what we have to hope for. Well, you know what? We're coming up on an hour. So it's like,
wow.
Yeah, we had a good conversation. So, and for those that stuck around with us, thank you. Mike was having, Ken was, he's up in Reno, and no, he's not in a casino. He's actually out in the boonies doing, something with infrastructure, all the good stuff. Louis is, he's not in DC this week. He's off doing some other political consulting, and it's like he's literally was running from the airport, so he was unavailable. And Harry was having technical difficulties. So he tried to get in several times. We couldn't make the link, but that'll just give him more to say next week.
I'm sure he'll have a lot to say. His first 100 days recap. So
yeah, and so now to be 100 plus, maybe 10. So hopefully we'll see, start getting some public feedback about what's coming up. So everybody, thank you again. We appreciate you being here so much and listening to us, and we'll see you in 1 week.
Bye-bye.
And